Good afternoon. On behalf of St. Ambrose University, I would like to welcome all of you to the university and especially to Christ the King Chapel, which we consider the heart of our beautiful campus. St. Ambrose University is proud to be a member of the Pacem and Terris Committee and to host this ceremony each year. This is the 44th time since the founding of this award in 1964 that we will honor yet another in the long line of champions for peace and freedom in our world. These, of course, are values that resonate throughout the history of St. Ambrose University. We would especially like to welcome this year's recipient, Dr. Widad Akreyi, and to thank you for accepting our award and for gracing us with your presence. This is also the first year we will honor one of our own local heroes of peace and justice, Nora Dvorak, and with the One Among Us Justice Award. Congratulations, Nora, and thank you too for being here among us. And so to all, welcome, thank you, as we honor again today two such inspiring individuals who follow in this long line of champions of peace and justice.
Thank you for the opportunity to give the opening prayer today. I'm Alan Ross, Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of the Quad Cities and a member of the Pacem and Terris Committee. During my lifetime, I have lived through many periods of unity as well as disunity in our country. Unfortunately, for today, we are enduring a period of disunity on several fronts. That's why programs such as Pacem and Terris Award is so important, for it brings all of us back to unity by recognizing amazing men and women throughout the world who are on the front lines of peace, human rights, and justice. I would like to now recite a prayer that is read every week in synagogues throughout the United States, and it can refer to any country throughout the world that believes in peace, human rights, and justice. It's called A Prayer for Our Country. Let us pray. Our God and God of our ancestors, we ask your blessings for our country, for its government, for its leaders and advisors, and for all who exercise just and rightful authority. Teach them insights from your Torah, that they may administer all affairs of state fairly, that peace and security, happiness and prosperity, justice and freedom may forever abide in our midst. Creator of all flesh, bless all the inhabitants of our country with your spirit. May citizens of all races and creeds form a common bond in true harmony to banish hatred and bigotry and to safeguard the ideals and free institutions that are the pride and glory of our country. May this land under your providence be an influence for good throughout the world, uniting all people in peace and freedom, helping them to fulfill the vision of your prophet. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they experience war anymore. And let us say, Amen.
I am thrilled to be able today to introduce Nora Dvorak, who's my friend and has been a hero to me for many, many years. Nora is a special person because Nora isn't a person that just wants to look at a problem and say somebody needs to do that. Nora's the one that takes care of the problem. When Nora was at Department of Human Services, she saw issue of children not having mentors. And so Nora went to Heart, and soon It developed into Big Brothers, Big Sisters here in the Quad Cities and other parts of the area. When Nora was director of refugee resettlement at the diocese, she saw that refugees were having issues trying to make cultural changes. And so Nora had community meetings every month with refugees who soon had people like the police department and other people in the community to help them learn to adapt to a brand new culture that they weren't aware of before. When Nora heard about an abandoned baby that had been found in a dumpster, Nora didn't just say that was too bad. Nora went to the county and got a law passed that became the Newborn Safe Haven, which later became a state law and has saved 30-some babies, I think it is, since then. When Nora heard about the issue of human trafficking, Nora became very concerned about all the young women and men that were caught up into this horrible lifestyle. And so Nora joined with some others and started attacking trafficking. They have been able to train people all over the state. They've joined with truck drivers, they've joined with pastors, and everyone in the area is now involved in watching for human trafficking victims. Nora, I've always said, is like the Energizer Bunny. No matter how bad her health is, no matter the pain that she suffers, no matter what, Nora just keeps on going. She doesn't stop for anything. If anyone deserves the One Among Us Peace and Justice Award, it's my friend Nora Dvorak. I'm so proud of you, Nora.
Getting old. It's my distinct honor and privilege to present the 2017 One Among Us Justice Award to Nora Dvorak on behalf of the Pacem and Terris Coalition of the Quad Cities, in light of your lifelong commitment to peace and justice. Your efforts have helped meet the direct needs of newborns and young children, teenagers and trafficking victims, immigrants and refugees. You've seen to the corporal works of mercy and been a driving force behind new community programs and state laws. And you have modeled how to care for the least among us by being one among us. Congratulations, Nora.
Thank you so much. I don't know what to say, but I do think that this chapel is filled with people who are one among us as well. So that's a joy to have you here with me. And thank you so much. This was quite a surprise.
Well, that's a hard act to follow. Congratulations, Nora. My name's Dan Ebner, and I'm used to teaching in 4-hour formats. How does that work for you? Kent, how much time did you say I had? 10 minutes? To talk about 47 people who've received this Pacem and Terris Award. So I'm going to try to focus on 3 people who maybe are not that well known, but I would suggest are three women who've received this award who are the kind of people that work behind the scenes, okay? So the first is Sister Dorothy Marie Hennessy from Dubuque. She's a Dubuque Franciscan. And in 1976, when I moved to Dubuque to be parish social ministry organizer for Catholic Charities, Dorothy Marie became my mentor. Much the same as Father Modet later, 10 years later, when I moved to Davenport, Dorothy would call me like literally every day, okay? And Dorothy didn't just like introduce herself or say hello. In fact, she never said hello or goodbye on the phone to me. She would just call and she would say, Dan, did you hear that the Iowa legislature is going to debate the death penalty? We need to do something about this. And in that particular case, what Dorothy did after the conversation is she went out on the highway, put up her thumb, and hitchhiked to Des Moines, okay? We later told Dorothy that, when she was so inspired or so inclined, we would be glad to drive her there. But that was Dorothy, okay? She always felt passionate about everything that was going on in the world. She was very involved with Network, okay? The Sisters Legislative Networking Organization that Simone Campbell later was recognized with Pacem and Terris for being the head of Network. And so Dorothy would, like her sisters Miriam and Gwen received the Pacem and Terris Award with Dorothy several years ago, but they would hear from Network about a legislative issue, and they would just get on the phone and start calling everyone. And so this was Dorothy, all right? So my favorite story about Dorothy and Gwen occurred when they were arrested together and were sent to prison in Peoria for doing civil disobedience. And this became quite the national news story. And I remember Dorothy telling the news media that, in a way, this was a real godsend to her because she had never had the opportunity to live under the same roof with her sister Gwen. Now, you see, the way this works is when you're the oldest of 14 children, as Dorothy was, and Gwen was the youngest of those 14 children, by the time Dorothy left to go to the convent, Gwen hadn't been born yet. Okay, so they had never been able to live under the same roof until they were in prison together in Peoria. So imagine how much safer the streets in Peoria were with those two nuns locked up, right? So when I moved to New York, Dorothy would oftentimes visit us and would sleep on our floor, okay? This is the way she would be. She would come out and for national demonstrations or national meetings, she would come out. And at that particular time, I met another person I'd like to lift up in this conversation, Eileen Egan, okay? So Eileen Egan was one of the founders of Pax Christi USA. When I was working for the Fellowship of Reconciliation in Nyack, New York, she was on our board for FOR. She was also one of the people who was closest to Dorothy Day. In fact, she was among Dorothy Day's closest friends. She planned Dorothy's funeral, which I attended when I lived in New York. And one of the things I remember about Dorothy's funeral was that the Cardinal of New York came into that funeral, okay? It was kind of surprising. There was quite a rustle in the back of the church, and the Cardinal came in, but he didn't go into the whole congregation. Instead, he kind of ducked into a chapel in the back of the church. And I thought it epitomized very well the relationship between Dorothy Day and the church at that particular time, right? They couldn't ignore her, but they couldn't totally embrace what she was about at that particular point, right? So Eileen was best of friends with Dorothy. Eileen was also very involved with Catholic Relief Services. That's where she worked. And it was through CRS that she met Mother Teresa, St. Teresa now, back in the 1950s. Eileen talked a lot about how when she would visit Mother Teresa, she was repulsed really by the conditions that Mother Teresa worked in. And she oftentimes talked about how difficult it was to make those kind of visits, and yet Mother Teresa always took it with the greatest wisdom and talked about how she found Christ in all of the people she served. And Eileen Egan, I would say, was one of the people who lifted up Mother Teresa and gave her an international forum by which Mother Teresa, of course, became so well known. But I would say Eileen Egan, of course, was very fortunate to literally be living in the company of saints, because we have now Mother Teresa becoming Saint Teresa, Saint Mother Teresa, and Dorothy Day now on her way to also becoming a saint. To which, of course, Dorothy would say, you always probably remember this, right? She always said that she didn't want to be ever named a saint because she didn't want to be so easily dismissed, right? So we don't want to dismiss Dorothy or any of these people who we lift up as our heroes today. The third woman that I want to lift up in this history of the award is Hildegard Gostmeyer. All right, so I met Hildegard in 1979 when I first moved to New York, and I was so captured by just her ability to work in nonviolence training. This is what she and her husband Jean did for their whole lifetime. They literally visited 90 countries doing nonviolence training, and they're accredited for training many of the heroes that we now know. So Hildegard and Jean traveled around the world with their families, and I remember when we first started trying to get Hildegard to come here for the Pacem Terris Award, she said, you know, in the USA you have so many resources. I'd rather devote my time to other places around the world. And it wasn't until she retired that we finally were able to get Hildegard to come to Davenport to receive this award. Some of my stories about Hildegard, I remember when she tells the story about visiting the president of Argentina, to which he replied to Hildegard, he said, you know, Hildegard, you cannot govern with the Sermon on the Mount. Hildegard replied, well, President, you can't be a Christian without it. That was Hildegard for you. She trained Oscar Romero, Cardinal Sin of the Philippines, Domhilder Kamra, who later received this Pacem Terris Award, and 3 of the people who received not only the Pacem Terris Award, but the Nobel Peace Prize as well. She trained Mairead Corrigan Maguire from Ireland, Adolfo Perez Esquivel from Argentina, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu from South Africa, all of whom credit Hildegard Gostmeyer and her husband Jean for their nonviolence. Domhilder Kamra famously said at the end of one of the sessions, he went out of the session, he says, now I'm a nonviolent bishop, to which Jean, Hildegard's husband, said, not until you do something. Domhilder Kamra is the one who famously said, I gave food to the poor and they called me a saint. I asked why they were poor and they called me a communist. So, 3 women, 3 very women with lots of things in common, working behind the scenes, totally devoted to nonviolence, and lifting up really this 2 feet approach that Father Madet teaches us, right? The whole idea of working with the poor and trying to somehow work for justice for them. So Dorothy Marie and Eileen Egan and Hildegard Gostmeyer, presente. You have been lights to the world and lights to us, and now it's time for us to take the light that they've shined for us and share that with others. Thank you very much.
President John F. Kennedy. John Howard Griffin. Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. R. Sharvant Schreiber. A. Philip Randolph. Reverend James Groppe. Saul Alinsky. Dorothy Day. Harold Hughes. Dom Hilder Kamara. Saint Teresa of Calcutta. Bishop Thomas Gumbleton. Crystal Lee Sutton. Bishop Ernest Unterkelfer. George Keenan. Helen M. Caldecott. Cardinal Joseph Bernardine. Bishop Morris Dingman. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Eileen Egan, Mairead Corrigan McGuire, Maria Julia Hernandez, Cesar Chavez, Daniel Berrigan, Jim Wallace, Bishop Samuel Ruiz, Jim and Shelley Douglas, Helen Prejean, Adolfo Perez Esquivel, Monsignor George Higgins, Lech Walesa, Dorothy Marie and Gwen Hennessy, Arthur Simon, Don Mosley, Bishop Salim Ghazal, Monsignor Marvin Mottet, Hildegard Gauss Meyer, John Deere, Bishop Alavaro Ramazzini, Kim Bobo, Sean Vanier, Simone Campbell, Thich Nhat Hanh, Father Gustavo Gutierrez Marino,
As a young child growing up in Kurdistan, Dr. Widad Akreyi survived the Iraqi government offensive against the Kurds in the mid-1970s. By her teens, Widad became a defender of human rights, boldly objecting to the interference of an oppressive government and society in the lives of herself and her classmates. Wise beyond her years, she explored the use of excessive force and the nature of violence and how that impacted victims and communities. In 1987, at great risk to herself, she secretly documented the immediate and long-term impacts of torture and other violations of human rights in the Kurdistan region and throughout Iraq. She was an eyewitness to Saddam Hussein's chemical attacks and the Anfal campaign, which has been recognized as genocide against the Kurds. The Anfal ordeal transformed her life, she said. She heard an inner voice tell her that there must be justice and fairness for all. Widad pursued her studies against all obstacles, earning a bachelor's degree in structural and civil engineering and a PhD in global health and cancer epidemiology. She also volunteered for Amnesty International. A prolific blogger, she harnessed the power of the internet to spark debate on issues related to human rights, peace, freedom of expression, women's empowerment, international understanding, and environmental health regulations, among other topics. She mobilized civil society activists to engage in politics and human rights dialogue and helped Amnesty International develop a blog on arms control. Along with her commitment to peace, she strived to ensure that victims of war and human rights violation receive the treatment and care that every human deserves. She joined Amnesty International's lobbying delegation at the United Nations headquarters to lobby for an international arms trade treaty. In 2013, the General Assembly adopted the historic treaty to control the trade in conventional arms worth $70 billion annually. In 2007, Widad co-founded Defend International, a non-governmental organization devoted to responding to grave violations of human rights, to monitor implementation of preventative measures designed to end impunity for the perpetrators of these crimes, to conduct research that may improve communities' health standards, and to promote peace and democracy through cultural relations and advocacy. When ISIS terrorists attacked the Kurdistan region in Iraq, targeting the Yazidis, Christians, and other minorities in 2014, Widad publicly denounced the slaughtering of civilians and the enslavement of Yazidi women and girls. Later that year, she launched a global campaign on social media that focused on 5 main goals: save Yazidis, save Christians, save Kobane, save humanity, and we want peace. She urged world leaders to speak out to prevent more massacres and to improve respect for all in the Middle East. Her persistence resulted in then UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon mentioning Yazidis in his speeches and other global leaders to demonstrate their commitment to protect the thousands of Yazidis trapped on Mount Sinjar. During the visit of Pope Francis to Turkey, she asked him to meet with refugees to restore hope. She suggested the transporting of selected groups of refugees to secure locations where their concerns could be heard. Pope Francis listened to their concerns. The Fellowship of Reconciliation honored Widad in 2014 for her worldwide work for peace and justice. The previous year, she received a special prize from the National Organization for Future Generations for being a, quote, passionate advocate of bridging the gap between cultures and making valuable contributions to humanity through the creation of a culture of justice. I'd like to introduce Widad Akreyi.
It's my pleasure to present the 2017 Pacem and Terris Peace and Freedom Award to Dr. Widad Akreyi on behalf of the Coalition of the Quad Cities, the Pacem and Terris Coalition of the Quad Cities. In light of your lifelong commitment to peace and justice, you have worked tirelessly for peace and justice and advocate for human dignity for all in the Middle East. Your mission has been to save lives, alleviate suffering, and promoting peace and equal rights and opportunities for all. Your fearless documentation of torture and other human rights violations, as well as your pursuit of justice through medical research and the monitoring of peace initiatives. Your findings regarding crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing have brought horrific acts to light for the world to see. You embody the words of Pope John XXIII in his encyclical Pacem and Terris as a spark of light, a center of love, a vivifying leaven to your sisters and brothers around the world. Congratulations, sweetheart.
Thank you so much for your generosity and for your wonderful hospitality. I am pleased to receive this award and humbled to join the previous recipients whom I admire. As the first citizen of Scandinavia and the first woman born in Kurdistan, in the heart of Mesopotamia, I am tremendously honored by this recognition. My profound gratitude goes to Director Hopkins for nominating me and for shepherding my cause. A very special thanks to Director Terris and to the distinguished members of the Pacem and Terris Coalition for this honor. My sincere thanks to the sponsors of this event and to the brilliant team that organized the ceremony. And of course, An enormous salute to the amazing women and gentlemen whose support is the reason I am up here right now. Thank you, Bishop Zincola, dear directors, President of St. Ambrose University, distinguished guests, religious leaders, and members of the interfaith community, dear students, ladies and gentlemen. The horrors of wars have shadowed our path in life. The soil of our land is saturated and soaked with the blood of the victims of genocides. If I start listing the massacres we have been subjected to, time would run out before it was completed. Today, I'll mention a few highlights from my own life. Those highlights are just some examples of what millions of civilians may have experienced or witnessed. I was only 5 years old when the Iraqi government declared a war against us. I survived the bombings, but I almost died due to malnutrition and an infection. My mom told me that we had to flee and that I was unconscious most of the time. She had cried and tried to find a hospital. What I didn't tell my mom is that I once woke up for a couple of minutes or so. I could hear her cries for help. She was running with my head dangling from her right arm. Once the war was over and we returned to a ruined home, I just hoped that it would never happen again. Yet, 6 years later, the Iraqi war with Iran began. During that war, our home was attacked 3 times. By the grace of God, we survived. Now, the war with Iran hadn't ended yet in 1987 when the Iraqi authorities waged a new war against us, this time with chemical weapons. Mustard gas and nerve agents such as sarin, taboon, and VX. Iraq called these military operations Anfal, which is the name of one of the chapters in Quran. They claimed that they were permitted to take our young girls and women as slaves and to kill us for being infidels. The truth is, by calling it Anfal, they were attempting to legitimize their attacks and to justify the killings, the kidnappings, and the enslavement of females. Only miraculously, my parents and I survived Anfal. We were on their list, but each time they came to take us, we managed to disappear. Many Kurds escaped to Bakur and Rouge Halat, and of those, thousands of children and the elders lost their lives because of hunger and the harsh weather. Overall, hundreds of thousands of Kurds were Anfalized, and an unspecified number of our girls and young women were sold to slavery in other countries. We know that a number of them were sent off to Egyptian brothels. Nonetheless, the more division the Iraqi authorities cultivated, the more we worked for inclusion. The more aggression they showed us, the more time we devoted to peace and reconciliation. The more civilians they tortured and slaughtered, the more my instinct guided me to reach out to all segments of society. The more they tried to erase the evidence, the more risks we took to document the atrocities and the harms inflicted on humans and the environment. Because one day we thought, one day the world will wake up and realize the repercussions of overlooking our suffering. And on that day, the souls of victims will finally find peace. The years went by, and nearly 3 decades later, we all saw how civilians were attacked again. This time, too, horrible acts against humanity were legitimized through religion. The Yazidis, the Christians, the residents of Kobane, that is, various ethnic and religious groups, were branded as infidels by ISIS and its partners, unleashing the first genocide in the 21st century in our region. If we compare this genocide to the Armenian genocide and to the Anfal genocide, we will find that the perpetrators of genocide have used or misused a specific religion to legalize their crimes. Not even children were spared. To see history repeating itself and the calamities of the past unfolding again, spilled out in the eyes of the victims and survivors, was unbearable. To witness rape and slavery practiced and legitimized, to witness it happen in the 21st century was hideous. Girls as young as 8 to 9 years old, and women all ages were being brutally violated and sold, sometimes for $10. My heart sank with their screams, and we had to do something to help them. My friends, many crimes against humanity and terrible acts of terror have sadly happened around the world in the last 3 years. These tragedies have brought us together. It has been heartwarming in the midst of all our sadness to see a good mix of people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different religions, or without religion, involved in demonstrations and urgent actions to support our calls for justice and peace. Those tireless supporters have tried to make a difference, one act of kindness, one act of solidarity, one act of charity at a time. And they did so because they believe that all humans are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They believe in acting towards one another in a spirit of humanity because human rights are universal and justice and peace are human rights. I have had several conversations with the survivors, and justice is what they want. But how can justice be served if we allow their heartbreak to break them? A real sense of safety and security is vital for them to pick up their lives from where they were torn apart. Without that sense, millions of civilians are now terrified for their future. While it's understandable that some of the targeted populations prefer to live seeking a secure life, we must never forget the fears of those who are left behind. And we must never forget that the aim of the current genocide was to ethnically and religiously cleanse our region. Their aim is to change the demographics of certain areas. It is my concern that if we only think of bringing people out, we may be, without us being aware of it, of course, helping the perpetrators of the genocide achieve their goals. We may end up realizing what they fought for. Our lives and the lives of future generations do not only depend on the conflicts that take place, but also on the solution we offer in response to them. To give some context, I want to say that I can't imagine my life without the experiences I had at the university in Erbil, or Hawler as we call it. I was fortunate to have friends among all ethnicities and religions. Being in this beautiful chapel reminds me of the time I was invited by one of my friends, a pretty Christian student. She invited me to her church, where I was anointed by the Archbishop of the Kildan Christian community. Now, nearly 27 years later, the genocide carried out was also meant to target those very people, my friends or their relatives and friends, those with whom I had spent unforgettable times many years ago. We have shared memories, and we have shared the same destiny for centuries now. We have faced challenges together, and we have come through them when we worked together. Hope becomes an option only when we get involved. Empathy must influence the nature of our interactions. And we must remember that compassion is contagious. The more we spread it, the more the people around us are gonna feel it and cherish it. And the more we see it elsewhere, the more it becomes attainable where we are. My colleagues say that I survived for a reason. My Armenian friends say that I was anointed for a reason. The majority of my religious friends say, God saved your life so that you could save the lives of others. Some go as far as saying, with the lives you have helped save, you can be assured of a good spot in heaven. Well, I may have survived the various forms of persecution for a number of reasons. Surely one of them is to stand here in front of you to raise the difficult questions and to ask the world and world leaders not to focus on short-term solutions. I am afraid, my friends, that the ugly chapters of genocides and the deep-rooted history of persecution in the Middle East will last longer if we ignore the facts. If we keep silent, we will probably witness another genocide at a future date. And the price we may pay for neglecting our duty to act may prove to be too high. So the solution to the first genocide in the 21st century is not to go back to the state before ISIS conquest. The solution is to have a comprehensive approach that would prevent any harm to the civilians, whether in Kurdistan region or in Rojava or in other parts of the MENA region. In order to do that, we have to recognize past genocides and the current one, and we have to develop an overarching strategy so that the civilians, all of them, irrespective of their origin, religion, or orientation, are treated fairly and safeguarded adequately. Now, we must also remember some will seek to divide us for their own political and economic gain. Some will try to use us against each other. But human suffering and well-being must unite us. We must strengthen our collective moral and ethical devotion to protect liberty, enhance human dignity, put an end to genocides, and to eradicate slavery. Friends, our initiative to combat persecution and promote justice is far from over. But what we have accomplished together is making a difference in some people's lives. We have seen too many armed conflicts. We have witnessed far too many violations of human rights. The 2014 genocide wasn't the first genocide, and if history is any indication, it won't be the last if we don't do something now. We must ask ourselves, what should we do to help prevent new genocides? It is time to embody justice in our intentions and actions. We are not supposed to choose the easy solutions. We will no longer accept that our lives be blanketed with the doctrines of oppression and persecution. We say no to the growing sense of gloom floating in the air. Now is the time to hope for a beam of light on the horizon. So let us roll up our sleeves and rekindle our commitment to a peace built on justice and freedom. Thank you.
Let us pray. In the name of our God, who both unsettles and inspires us, let us give praise and thanks. Today we are especially grateful for the untiring and countless works of Widad and Nora. In joy and hope, the pastoral constitution on the church in the modern world, we are reminded peace results from that harmony built into human society by its divine founder and actualized by people as they thirst after even greater justice. We are gathered here as a community of believers who hunger and thirst for peace. We are all part of one global human family living together in a world that remains broken and divided. We join in prayer, asking for strength and courage to change what is unloving in ourselves. May we recognize the call to commit to actions for justice so that soon the universal desire for peace will be realized. Let us always walk humbly, love tenderly, and act justly as we build relationships of peace with our sisters, brothers, and all creation. United, we go forth knowing that if there is to be peace on earth, it begins in each of our hearts. Salam, shalom, fra, paz, peace.